It began with a photograph no one had meant to find. In the quiet, fluorescent halls of the Nevada Historical Institute, archivist Layla Tran was scanning a box labeled simply Mining Uncatalogued, 1910-1920. Dust motes hung in the pale light, dancing as if aware of the small revelation about to emerge. Among the brittle negatives and forgotten ledgers was a single glass plate image wrapped in linen, delicate but astonishingly well preserved. When the scanner's beam swept across it, a figure came into view, a miner flat against the ground crawling head-first into a narrow slit in the earth. His clothes were worn, his boots thick with clay, and his lamp cast a tiny oval of light against the rock. Across the top of the frame, someone had scrawled in fading pencil, "Roarke Claim 1918. Layla adjusted the focus, increasing the contrast. The man's face was obscured by the brim of his hat, but his posture told a story. Exhaustion, perhaps determination, maybe fear. Behind him the cave's mouth yawned black, swallowing his legs almost entirely. And then, in the darkness beyond that halo of lamplight, Layla saw it. A faint shimmer, a curve of shape that didn't belong to rock. She leaned closer to the screen, her breath fogging the glass. The outline looked like a hand, gloved, pale with dust, reaching outward from within the void. By evening, the photograph had stirred the curiosity of Dr. Clara Myles, head of the Historical Imaging Department, and a historian known for her meticulous reconstructions of early 20th century expeditions. She arrived after hours, her coffee gone cold, drawn by Layla's insistence that there's something wrong with the background. When Clara viewed the scan, she said nothing for a long while. Her eyes traced the angles, the shadows, the impossible shape within the cave's throat. "Enhance it," she finally murmured. "Not too much. Just enough to see if it's a trick of light." Layla complied, layering filters until the grain softened and the outlines grew distinct. What emerged was no illusion. The hand was small, human, and positioned backward, as if its owner faced away from the camera, seemed frozen mid-motion. Fingers half-curled, the image became the center of the Institute's next digital restoration cycle. Files were cross-referenced, metadata created, and the photograph entered the online database with a timestamp that would, within weeks, ignite a chain of inquiries across forums dedicated to lost expeditions. Amateur historians speculated wildly. Was the figure behind the miner a second worker? A reflection? A distortion of early film exposure? Yet the consensus refused to settle. There were no known reports of an accident at the Roarke Claim in 1918, nor any records of a miner named Roarke in the regional archives. It was as if both man and mine had been erased before the photograph was even taken. Clara spent the following nights piecing together fragments, mining registries, supply ledgers, letters between local prospectors. Every lead dissolved into speculation. But one scrap of evidence emerged. A single inventory list from a general store in Virginia City, dated March 1918, noting provisions for E. Roarke, 2 sacks flour, 1 can paraffin, 3 feet rope, 1 lantern. No address, no return. It was the first and only proof that someone by that name existed. The mystery became more than archival interest. It turned into an obsession. Clara, who had once prided herself on dispassionate scholarship, began to dream about the image. The motionless miner, the beckoning dark, the unseen story paused in a century-old frame. Each morning she returned to the photo, convinced there was more than what pixels revealed. She began studying the geology of the region, consulting maps drawn before World War I, tracing how underground veins might have shifted with time. One map, yellowed and incomplete, marked a Roarke claim several miles outside Tonopah. Long since abandoned, the terrain reclaimed by sagebrush and wind. The name was written in the same hand as the label on the photograph. On the 12th day of research, Clara invited Layla into her office and laid the printed scan between them. "Look at the edges," she said. "There's a shape beyond the hand and faint like fabric." Layla nodded. It looked like the corner of a sleeve. The implication struck them both. If there was another person inside that cave, where had they gone? No records, no graves, no reports of a collapse. Yet the image, undeniable in its stillness, captured a moment that hinted at motion, something happening just outside the frame's reach. Later that night, when the building was empty and the hum of machines had died, Clara reopened the scan for one final look before heading home. She adjusted the digital contrast again, just enough to darken the shadows. For a split second in the space between frames, the image seemed to shift. The gloved hand blurred, as though the fingers had twitched. She blinked hard, but it was gone. Only pixels. Only the past. Yet when she closed her laptop and turned off the lights, the darkness of the office seemed to breathe, slow, shallow, as though echoing something far beneath the Nevada soil. When the crate arrived, no one paid it much attention. It was one of dozens retrieved from a condemned storage facility outside Reno, a place that had once served as the state's archive overflow during the 1950s. Most boxes contained routine debris of forgotten lives, faded tax records, broken mining lamps, rusted hinges, even a collection of postcards never sent. But this crate, wrapped in black twine and labeled Roarke Claim a Private, immediately caught Clara's eye. Its corners were blistered from heat, the lid warped as though it had endured long years in damp air. She ordered it opened under controlled light, with gloves and soft brushes at hand. Inside lay an assortment of unremarkable tools: a tin compass, 2 oil lamps, a cracked canteen, and something wrapped carefully in oiled canvas, a notebook small enough to fit in one hand. The leather cover was worn smooth, the edges chewed by time. When Clara lifted it, the faint scent of paraffin and iron drifted upward. The first pages were blank, then smeared with mud, then suddenly clear. Neat handwriting in indigo ink that had somehow survived the decades. The opening line read, "Property of Elias Roarke, December 1917. Below, a list of equipment, expenses, hand sketches of mineral veins filled the early pages with the confidence of a man certain he was on the verge of fortune. Clara's pulse quickened as she turned each fragile sheet, discovering notes that charted his progress through winter, his calculations of soil density, and references to something he called the Breathless Passage. The phrase appeared again and again, sometimes underlined, sometimes written in haste, as if it pressed on his mind. The entries grew darker as the dates approached April 1918. Air thinner today. No birds above camp. Heard a voice. Thought it was wind, but no echo returned. Another page described a narrow shaft he'd discovered beneath a rock ledge, too small to enter upright. Must crawl, he wrote. Feels alive down there and heat coming from below. In the margins, smudged by the tremor of exhaustion, he had drawn a rough map of the tunnels with arrows pointing toward the words, "Mirror Vein." Clara copied the sketch into her notes, noticing how the handwriting faltered halfway through a sentence. "If the sound is what I think," and then nothing. The line ended abruptly. The ink pooled in a blot that soaked through the next page. After that, the rest of the notebook was blank. Layla watched silently from across the table. "Could he have died in the cave?" she asked. Clara didn't answer immediately. She was tracing the indentation of Roarke's final unfinished line with her gloved finger. "Maybe," she said finally. "Or maybe he found something he couldn't explain." She closed the book gently, as though the air inside it might escape if left open too long. The room seemed smaller now, filled with the weight of words that had survived when their author had not. That evening, Clara returned home carrying scanned copies of every page. Her apartment, lined with artifacts and old maps, looked more like an archive than a home. She spread the reproductions across her dining table, aligning dates, cross-referencing with geological surveys from the period. The mirror vein caught her attention. No such term appeared in mining glossaries of the time. The closest match was a reflection seam, a phenomenon where 2 layers of mineral mirrored each other along a fault line, often creating illusions of depth when light struck them. Could that be what Elias saw? A geological anomaly that bent light, creating the illusion of movement in the darkness? The rational answer comforted her, yet the phrasing of his notes, "feels alive down there," clung to her thoughts. By midnight, she had transcribed every legible word. One notation at the corner of a page, barely visible, read simply for Anna. A search of early 20th century census records yielded a match. Anna Doyle, born 1894, listed as engaged to an Elias Roarke in the 1917 Virginia City Parish Registry. No marriage certificate followed. Anna disappeared from records the following year. Clara stared at the dates, realizing the coincidence. 1918, the same year Elias vanished. The war had ended that autumn. The influenza pandemic had ravaged the state. And yet this story, two names fading from history, had left no trace but a photograph and a notebook. The next morning, Clara brought the ledger to the Institute's preservation lab for infrared scanning. As the machine's beam passed over the ink, faint words emerged between the lines, invisible to the naked eye but still inscribed in the cellulose fibers. Phrases that chilled her. It breathes when the wind stops, and if I don't return, seal it. That final phrase appeared beneath the last incomplete entry. Written with force, the pen gouging the page. Clara felt her throat tighten. What had he meant by seal it? The passage? The mind, the truth. Later, as she walked the long corridor back to her office, she caught her reflection in the glass door, pale, drawn, her eyes hollow from sleepless nights. Behind her, for a fleeting instant, the mirrored surface seemed to show another figure, hunched wearing a miner's hat, face hidden by shadow. When she turned, the hallway was empty. Only the echo of her own footsteps remained, soft and hollow like breaths in stone. That afternoon, Clara submitted a funding proposal to the Institute board. The subject line read, "The Roarke Claim Investigation, Phase 1 Field Verification." Her reasoning was academic: geological survey, archival preservation, historical documentation. But in truth, she needed to see it for herself. Not because of the gold, not even because of Elias, but because the photograph and the ledger had begun to speak to one another in her mind, forming a dialogue that refused to be ignored. One man had crawled into the earth and never come back. One image had survived to show the moment just before he disappeared. And now, a century later, someone had to follow where he'd gone. Not to find gold, but to find the last breath he'd left behind. That night, Clara dreamed she was inside the tunnel. The air pressed close, dry and heavy. Her head, faint lamplight flickered, and a voice, quiet, patient, whispered her name. When she woke, her hand was clenched around the copy of the miner's ledger. The page opened to the words, "If I don't return, seal it." The morning sun streamed across the paper, turning the ink into thin veins of gold. She took it as a sign. The past was calling and the cave was waiting. The desert had always carried the memory of its own silence. In the stillness of Nevada's high plains, wind carved its patient lines through sandstone and time, erasing the footprints of anyone who had once believed they could leave a mark. When Dr. Clara Myles first set foot on the outskirts of Tonopah that spring, she felt the strange, almost sacred pull of that silence, the same silence she imagined Elias Roarke must have heard more than a century before, when he vanished into the mouth of the earth and never came back. The expedition began under the pretext of a research documentary commissioned by a small historical network. Though Clara knew the true purpose was less about film and more about revelation. Her team was small. Layla Tran, the young archivist whose eyes missed nothing. Marco Ruiz, a local geologist with an instinct for unstable ground. And Andrew Carter, a cameraman whose calm humor masked a deep fascination for things that couldn't be explained. Together, they drove out from Tonopah in a single van loaded with equipment, ground-penetrating radar, drones, lights, and a portable 3D scanner. The terrain grew rougher as they followed the coordinates Clara had extracted from Rourke's crude map. Eventually, the dirt road disintegrated into a trail of broken shale and sagebrush, ending near a cluster of jagged hills where nothing seemed alive but the wind itself. "There," Clara said, pointing to a low rise where the rock darkened into a natural scar. She felt it even before she saw it. A change in the air, a faint metallic scent she couldn't name. The team fanned out, instruments humming softly in the stillness. Marco called out measurements, tapping the scanner's readings. "Dense substructure under here," he said. "Looks like a collapsed tunnel. Goes down maybe 15 feet, then flattens out." He crouched, brushing dust from a narrow crevice half hidden beneath a slab of limestone. "This might be your cave." Layla knelt beside him, her flashlight cutting through the shadows. "The rock's been disturbed," she said. "Not natural collapse. See the layering? Someone sealed it deliberately." Clara felt her pulse quicken. The words from the ledger echoed in her mind. "If I don't return, seal it." She crouched low, pressing her palm against the cool surface. The stone felt wrong, too smooth in places, as if fitted by human hands. Over it, the desert wind sighed, carrying the faint smell of old dust and iron. By afternoon, They had cleared enough debris to reveal what had once been a narrow entryway, barely wide enough for a person to crawl through. The deeper they dug, the heavier the air became, rich with that strange metallic tang. Marco held up a sensor. "You smell that?" "Trace sulfur, maybe mercury vapor," he said. "Could be trapped air from a vein collapse, but it's odd." Clara didn't answer. She was staring into the black slit that had appeared before them, an opening no larger than a coffin's lid. In that darkness, history seemed to wait, unbreathing, patient. As the sun began to dip behind the ridge, they set up lights and a small drone to capture the first interior footage. The machine hovered, its rotors stirring the dust as it drifted forward into the passage. For a few seconds the feed showed only rock, then something else, a ripple of texture across the wall like overlapping fingerprints frozen in stone. Layla frowned. "Those striations don't look geological," she said. "They're too symmetrical." Marco leaned in, studying the live feed. "Could be tool marks, someone widening the shaft." But Clara's eyes were fixed on the screen. At the edge of the light, something shimmered, a thin glint as if a droplet of water caught the beam and vanished. Then the drone's signal crackled, stuttered, and went black. The team worked in silence, replaying the short footage on loop. There was nothing overtly supernatural, nothing anyone could call evidence, but something about the way the light bent along the stone unsettled them. "Tomorrow we'll go in," Clara said finally. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly as she shut down the monitor. "We'll document everything properly. I want to compare the internal structure with Roarke's notes." That night they camped near the site, the air turning cold and brittle beneath a spray of stars. Around the fire, Marco talked about old mining superstitions, how men used to swear caves could breathe, exhale, even whisper if you listened long enough. Layla smiled faintly but said nothing. Andrew kept his camera on, filming the firelight flickering across their faces. When Clara finally spoke, her voice was low. "He asked for it to be sealed," she said. "Whatever he found in there, he didn't want it opened again." No one replied. The flames popped softly, sending up sparks like fleeting ghosts. Somewhere in the distance, the wind changed direction, carrying a deep, hollow sound from the ridge. A sigh, almost human, fading as quickly as it came. At dawn, they began the entry procedure. Marco fitted a respirator and clipped a safety line to his harness. "I'll go first," he said. Clara shook her head. "No, I'm going in. It's my project." The words came out sharper than she intended, but the decision felt inevitable. With Layla's help, she strapped on the helmet and lamp, the notebook tucked safely in her pack. Before crawling inside, she paused to touch the rim of the cave, the same threshold Elias Roarke had crossed 107 years earlier. The stone was cool and faintly damp. She took a breath and entered. The passage tightened quickly, pressing in from all sides. The light from her helmet danced over veins of quartz and glints of pyrite, the fool's gold that might have lured Roarke deeper. The air was heavy, stale, and carried that same metallic sweetness that clung to the back of her throat. Every movement stirred clouds of dust that seemed to shimmer unnaturally in the light. Behind her, Marco's voice crackled over the radio. "Reading stable oxygen levels so far. You good?" "I'm fine," she replied, though her heartbeat said otherwise. She crawled farther, the rock scraping her shoulders, the rope dragging behind like a tether to the world above. Then the tunnel widened suddenly into a small chamber. Clara knelt, shining her light around. Old wooden supports, half rotted, still lined the walls. A pickaxe lay rusted near a mound of collapsed rock. Beside it she saw something that froze her breath. A strip of leather embedded in the dirt, attached to what looked like the remains of a belt. She reached for it carefully, brushing away the dust. The buckle gleamed faintly, engraved with the initials ER. "Clara?" Layla's voice cracked over the radio. "We're picking up something weird on the audio feed. Are you moving equipment down there?" Clara looked around. "No, why?" Static filled the line, then a faint sound came through. A slow rhythmic pattern like breathing filtered through stone. She held her own breath, listening. It wasn't echo and it wasn't mechanical. It came from deeper within the rock, beyond the reach of her light. "Pull me out," she said quietly, her voice trembling despite herself. "Now." The rope tightened, and slowly she backed out through the narrow passage until sunlight burned her eyes again. When she emerged, the others stared at her, silent. The desert was utterly still. She unhooked her gear, dust streaking her face, and held up the buckle. "He was here," she whispered. They all looked toward the dark slit in the ground, and for a moment even the wind refused to move. The buckle sat on the table inside the tent, like a relic from another world. Under the glare of the portable lamps, the initials ER shimmered faintly against the brass, untouched by a century of dust. Clara could feel the weight of it, not just the metal itself, but the life it once belonged to. Elias Roarke was no longer just a name in a ledger. He had crawled through this same earth, breathed this same air, and left behind an object that refused to decay. As Marco examined it with gloved hands, Layla stood silent, her gaze drifting toward the mouth of the cave, where the rope still hung slack, as though waiting for someone to return. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. The desert was windless again, the silence absolute. The rhythmic breathing sound she'd heard inside the cave pulsed in her mind, slow and deliberate, like the memory of something that hadn't finished speaking. She replayed the recording on her tablet. Static, faint distortion, then that pattern. Inhale, exhale, steady as a living chest. She ran it through filters, isolating the low frequencies. Beneath the noise, something else emerged. Short, irregular sounds, almost syllables, a murmur too fragmented to decipher. She leaned closer to the screen, heart thudding. It wasn't wind, not machinery, not human. It was something trying to form words. At dawn, Layla appeared with a discovery. She had spent the night cross-referencing Roarke's notes with wartime communication logs and found an archived letter from 1918 addressed to an A. Doyle. The paper had been scanned decades, haggled and forgotten in a federal record database. Clara read it in silence. Anna, I have found it. The passage breathes like a living thing. I think I know why they call gold a curse. It listens, it reflects. When my lamp went out, I saw light moving where there was no flame. If I am right, this is not a vein of metal, but of memory itself. I will prove it. If I do not return, remember me not for the gold, but for the truth that hides behind its shine. The letter had been signed Elias Roarke. Roarke claim, April 1918. The last line struck Clara like a whisper from the dark. A vein of memory. She thought of the strange shimmer in the rock, how the light bent in the drone footage, how the air inside seemed almost warm, alive. Could the minerals somehow reflect motion, like a recording imprinted into stone? The idea was absurd, but so was everything about this discovery. The next day, the team decided to expand the entry. Marco reinforced the upper section with steel supports, and by noon they had cleared enough debris to stand upright inside the first chamber. Clara watched as the sunlight reached the rock, revealing colors she hadn't noticed before. Streaks of gold, yes, but also deep veins of silver and faint iridescent blue, like the shimmer of oil on water. She ran her fingers along the wall and felt a vibration, almost imperceptible, as if the stone carried an echo of something buried within. Geothermal resonance, Marco muttered, tapping the rock. Could be pressure waves or even piezoelectric activity. These minerals can store and release electrical energy when stressed. Old mines like this sometimes hum, but this... He trailed off, listening. The hum grew slightly louder, a low note rising and falling, not unlike breath. Layla adjusted the camera. It's like the cave is... speaking. She smiled nervously, half joking, half reverent. Clara didn't respond. She was staring at a pattern etched faintly into the wall. Marks that looked like scratches at first, but on closer inspection formed deliberate curves, repeating symbols, half letters. They weren't natural. Someone had carved them. Back at camp, she compared the carvings to the handwriting in Roarke's ledger. The loops, the angles, they matched. He had written here in the dark, pressing words into stone instead of paper. She overlaid the photograph of the carvings onto the letter to Anna, and the alignment was exact. He had tried to write the same sentence, "If I don't return, seal it." But beneath that line, there was another series of symbols, ones not found in any known alphabet. By sunset, the desert temperature dropped sharply. The wind picked up, scattering grit across the tents. The team huddled inside, analyzing data, when Andrew burst in holding the camera. "You need to see this," he said. He connected it to the monitor, scrubbing through the footage from inside the chamber. There, look. The frame froze on a shot of the cave wall, illuminated by their floodlight. For a second, everything was still. Then a faint shimmer rippled across the surface, almost invisible. The dust motes seemed to reverse direction, falling upward. It's not video compression, Andrew said. I double-checked the file. That movement, whatever it is, was there when we filmed. Layla leaned closer. Could the minerals reflect us somehow? Like delayed light patterns? Maybe, Marco said, but his tone betrayed uncertainty. Or maybe we're looking at something geological we don't yet understand. Clara didn't say a word. She was fixated on the edge of the frame. Just before the footage ended, a shape flickered, a faint outline behind the shimmer. Human, crouched low, the hint of a shoulder and arm crawling deeper into the darkness. She froze the image, enlarged it. The figure's head was turned slightly, and though the face was blurred by the distortion, she could make out the curve of a hat brim, the slope of a shoulder. A miner's silhouette, no one spoke. The tent filled with the soft whir of the projector and the hiss of wind against canvas. That's impossible, Layla whispered. That can't be... Clara shut off the screen. Tomorrow, she said quietly, we go deeper. I want to see what's beyond that chamber. Layla stared at her. You think he's down there? Clara didn't answer. She stepped outside, letting the cold air sting her face. The desert stretched silent in every direction, vast and merciless. The stars had risen, sharp and clear, scattering across the black like fragments of broken ore. Somewhere beneath that same ground, Elias Roarke had written to the woman he loved and vanished into the earth. And now, more than a century later, his breath still seemed to linger, caught between stone and memory, waiting for someone to listen. She looked back toward the cave, the entrance now covered with tarps and steel braces. The wind hissed softly through the gaps, making a sound almost like whispering. It carried across the sand, faint but rhythmic. Inhale, exhale, as if the mine itself were breathing in its sleep. By the time the sun rose over the desert again, the expedition site had transformed into a small field station. Cables wound across the sand, laptops hummed in the shade of canvas tents, and the team moved with quiet precision, their faces drawn but focused. Clara felt that familiar mixture of anticipation and unease, the sensation of standing at the threshold of something that wanted to be found. The previous night's footage still haunted her, that blurred figure flickering beyond the cave's light. Every rational part of her mind whispered explanations, reflections, data errors, tricks of light, yet her instincts refused to believe it was nothing. She decided they would record everything, from the first breath of air inside the shaft to the last footstep out. Marco set up vibration sensors, Layla synchronized the audio recorders, and Andrew mounted small cameras along the tunnel walls. No dark corners, he said with a faint smile, though his voice lacked conviction. When the preparations were done, Clara clipped on her microphone, adjusted her helmet, and took the lead again. The cave waited, its mouth black and breathless, the air within already cooler than the desert morning. The crawl back through the narrow passage felt different this time, heavier, slower, as though the rock itself resisted their entry. Dust floated in shimmering veils around their lamps. Each breath echoed off the stone, returning softer, distorted. The rope brushed against the walls with a sound like fabric over glass. At one point, Clara paused to catch her breath and heard a faint metallic hum, low and distant, almost like a tuning fork vibrating somewhere in the depths. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. Marco nodded. Seismic resonance, maybe. Air pocket vibrating through quartz. But his tone betrayed uncertainty. The sound grew faintly rhythmic, two notes alternating like inhalation and exhalation. They reached the chamber where the initials ER had been found. The wooden supports groaned faintly under their own age. Marco set up a laser scanner to map the walls, while Layla placed directional microphones near the carvings. "Recording rolling," she said, and a small red light blinked to life. Clara ran her hand over the stone again, tracing Roarke's engraved words. The surface felt warmer than before, faintly pulsing under her fingertips. "Marco, temperature check," she said quietly. He pointed the infrared sensor and frowned. "It's warmer along the vein, 5 degrees above ambient. That's impossible without an external source. Could be residual radiation," Andrew suggested from behind the camera, "or a metallic deposit generating heat." Marco shook his head. "Quartz and iron pyrite. Neither should do this." Then, as they argued, the microphones picked up something new, a soft, deliberate sound from deeper within the tunnel. 3 slow taps, evenly spaced. Then silence. Layla froze. "Did someone just—" "No one's down there," Marco said. But even as he spoke, the taps came again, clearer this time. Tap, tap, tap. Like knuckles against metal. Clara motioned for silence. The air felt charged, as if static rippled through it. She stepped closer to the narrow corridor leading beyond the chamber. Elias! The name left her lips before she could stop it, carried on instinct rather than reason. The moment she spoke, the sound stopped. Andrew's camera trembled slightly in his hands. Dr. Myles, you might want to look at this. He pointed toward the monitor attached to his shoulder rig. The live feed from one of the mounted cameras showed a thin mist beginning to form near the far wall. Not smoke, not dust, but a silver-gray haze that shimmered with faint motes of light. The sound resumed, this time not tapping but whispering. The microphones caught it clearly. Slow, deliberate, breathy syllables that almost formed words. Clara's blood ran cold as she listened. The cadence matched human speech, but not any language she recognized. It rose and fell in tone like a lullaby hummed from far away. Get this on a separate channel, Layla said, switching inputs. We'll isolate it later. But Clara barely heard her. She was staring into the haze, which seemed to move with its own pulse, retreating slightly whenever her light touched it. Beneath the glow, the rock shimmered again. The same mirrored distortion seen in the earlier footage. Only now, within that shifting reflection, she thought she saw a face. It was faint, like an image beneath water. The outline of a miner's hat, eyes obscured, lips slightly parted. And then it was gone. The air turned colder. The sensors began to beep. Marco checked the readouts. Pressure change, he said, voice tight. We need to back out. But Clara couldn't move. The humming sound had deepened, resonating through her bones. She felt irrationally that the cave was responding. Not threatening, but aware. She switched on her microphone again. Elias Roarke, she said softly, her voice trembling. If you can hear this. We found your ledger. We're here to understand. The hum subsided. For one long breathless second there was silence. Then, faintly, the microphones captured a single sound. A human breath exhaling impossibly close to the recorder, though no one stood near it. The waveform spiked on Layla's screen. The air grew suddenly still. Out, Marco said. Now. They withdrew quickly, dragging cables behind them, their boots scraping the stone. When they finally emerged into daylight, the desert wind felt like salvation. Clara dropped her pack, heart pounding, lungs burning. Layla checked the recorders, her hands trembling. It's all there, she whispered. Every second of it. That night they played the recording in the safety of the tent. The sound of the tunnel filled the air, the scraping of tools, the murmur of voices, the low resonance of stone. And then came the whispering. Slowed down, the syllables formed clearer shapes, fragments of English words interwoven with breath. Remember me. Seal it, still here. Andrew turned off the speaker, face pale. That's him, he said quietly. Clara sat back, staring at the flickering lantern light. Remember me. Seal it. The same plea written in Rourke's ledger, carved into the wall. The same phrase crossing time to reach them now through static and stone. She realized then that whatever Elias Roarke had discovered in 1918 hadn't died with him. It had been waiting, preserved somehow within the cave, recorded in its very walls. A message caught between centuries, speaking only when someone listened, and they had listened. Outside, the desert wind rose again, sweeping across the camp and sighing softly against the rocks. For an instant, Clara could swear it carried a voice, not in words but in rhythm, steady and patient. Inhale, exhale, the sound of the earth remembering. Back in Reno, weeks later, the discovery had already become an institutional obsession. The audio files from the cave, those haunting exhalations shaped like words, had circulated among experts, skeptics, and sound engineers alike. Each analysis came back inconclusive. Low-frequency interference, some claimed. Electromagnetic disturbance, said others. But no one could replicate it, and no one could explain why. When played at a slowed frequency, the cadence of the whisper matched precisely the breath intervals of a living human being. Clara barely noticed the growing chatter online. She had locked herself in the Institute's digital lab, determined to return to the beginning, to the image that had started everything. The 1918 photograph of Elias Roarke, crawling into the cave, now glowed on her monitor. At full resolution, every pixel of the century-old glass plate enhanced through hours of meticulous restoration. Layla joined her, silent, carrying a thermos of coffee and a nervous energy that filled the room. "Frame integrity still solid," Layla said. But the new spectral filter picked up something behind him. "You'll want to see this." Clara adjusted her glasses, leaning forward. The miner's figure, hat brim low, lamp glinting, was as familiar to her now as her own reflection. But as the filter deepened the image spectrum beyond visible light, faint outlines began to appear in the shadows behind him. At first it looked like grain noise, then it formed shape, a human one. A hand, gloved and half buried in shadow, reaching outward from within the tunnel. It wasn't the same as before. It was clearer now, sharper, its angle wrong for a reflection. The fingers were bent backward, grasping at something unseen. Layla zoomed in slowly. "There's more," she whispered. "Look just past his shoulder." Clara froze. There, faint but distinct, was another shape, part of a sleeve, the suggestion of a shoulder, and beyond it something stranger. A shimmer, like heat haze, distorted the stone texture around the second figure. When they enhanced the pixel gradient, the distortion formed a ring, a halo of refracted light, concentric and impossibly even, as though emanating from within the cave itself. "It's not lens flare," Clara said softly. "This camera didn't use film emulsion like that. The exposure's too long for motion blur." Layla bit her lip. "Then what caused it?" Clara didn't answer. She isolated the glow, adjusted the saturation, and layered the spectral data from the drone footage they had captured inside the cave. The patterns overlapped perfectly. The same faint shimmer, the same circular distortion in the air, recorded 107 years apart. Her pulse quickened. "It's as if the cave's reflecting itself through time." Layla exhaled a short, incredulous laugh. "You mean like a geological mirror?" Clara shook her head. "Not geological, temporal." They sat in silence, the monitor humming quietly. Outside the lab's high windows, dusk pressed blue against the glass. Clara leaned back, rubbing her temples. She thought of Roarke's letter to Anna Doyle, a vein of memory itself. The phrase no longer sounded poetic. It sounded precise. When they enhanced the image again, pushing the spectral balance beyond tolerance, a new detail emerged near the corner of the frame. A smudge of light that, when corrected for contrast, became a reflection. Faint like a ghostly double exposure, but unmistakably human. It was the same as the miner's figure, same build, same posture, except reversed as if mirrored in time. Layla stepped back from the screen. "That's him," she whispered. "It's Elias, but how—" The lights flickered. For a heartbeat the room went dark. Then the monitor glowed again, showing both figures, the one entering the cave and the reflection staring back from the dark. Clara felt a chill crawl up her arms. For the briefest instant, she thought she saw the reflection's head tilt, eyes lifting toward the camera. Then the image froze, the system unresponsive. "Power surge," Layla muttered, scrambling to reboot the software. Clara didn't move. Her mind raced with possibilities that defied every law of physics she knew. When the screen finally returned, the distortion had vanished. The image was as it had always been, just a miner crawling into a cave frozen in time, but Clara's heart would not slow. She exported the enhanced frame, saved it in multiple formats and transferred it to a secure drive. Then, unable to shake the unease prickling beneath her skin, she opened the audio recording from the mine, the one where the whispering had first appeared. The breath began, soft and even. Then, just before the words "remember me," there was a faint metallic click. She isolated the sound, boosted its volume. It wasn't mechanical. It was the distinct shutter of an early camera. Clara's throat went dry. She pulled the image back onto the screen, overlaying the waveform from the recording. The peaks of the audio lined perfectly with the edges of the photograph's light spectrum, as if the sound had been embedded in the image all along. Layla leaned over her shoulder. "That's impossible," Clara's voice trembled. "Unless the moment he was photographed never ended." They sat in silence, the only sound the low hum of the cooling fans. The photograph, magnified to the point of abstraction, now looked like a portal, grain and light forming a texture that pulsed faintly, as though alive, then faintly through the speaker. Something new surfaced, a word not heard before. Not remember or seal it, but something softer, spoken between breaths, still watching. The word hung in the air, hollow and cold. Clara and Layla stared at each other, neither daring to speak. The monitor flickered once more, then steadied. The miner's image remained still, his hand frozen mid-crawl. Yet the shadow behind him, just beyond reach of the light, now seemed slightly closer. That night, Clara stayed alone in the lab. She replayed the footage again and again, the sound of that single phrase echoing in her headphones, still watching. It didn't sound like a warning. It sounded like acknowledgement, like someone or something had become aware of being observed. When she finally turned off the lights and stepped into the corridor, the air of the institute felt heavier than usual. The hum of the refrigeration units pulsed in steady rhythm, eerily like breathing, and for the first time since finding the photograph, Clara wondered whether the cave was truly a place, or whether it had become a moment in time that had never stopped recording, waiting for someone to press play again. The morning Clara announced her return to the Roarke claim, the air inside the Nevada Historical Institute felt charged, like a storm about to break. No one tried to stop her this time. The board had grown uneasy with the publicity surrounding her findings, the audio anomalies, the photograph's unexplained distortions, the flood of journalists demanding statements she refused to give. "We can't control the narrative anymore," one director had said. "Do whatever you need to, but bring us something we can explain." So she assembled a smaller team, just herself, Layla, Marco, and Andrew, and returned to the desert, where the ground still remembered them. The cave's entrance had been reinforced with steel brackets and caution tape, but nothing could restrain the wind that moaned through its seams. The desert was cooler now, and the air carried the scent of dust and metal that always seemed to follow the name Elias Roarke. They set up camp farther from the cave this time, as if distance might offer safety. Clara walked to the entrance alone, notebook in hand, tracing her fingers over the rock. The edges still bore marks of the tools they had used to uncover it, but now there were new scratches, thin, deliberate, forming faint curves that hadn't been there before. She leaned closer. They spelled letters E-R, her breath caught. The metal buckle they'd found inside had carried those same initials. But this carving looked fresh. Layla's voice echoed behind her. "Someone's been here since we left?" Clara shook her head. No one could have gotten past the fencing. These were made from inside. From inside. The thought settled like cold iron in her stomach. By midday, they began the descent. The plan was simple. Clara and Marco would enter first, equipped with new oxygen sensors and high-definition body cams. Layla would monitor the live feed from the surface, recording both audio and video data, while Andrew handled drone support. Every step would be documented. Every anomaly captured. The cave greeted them with the same breath of cool metallic air. Clara led, crawling through the passage until she reached the first chamber, the one with Roarke's carvings and the strange heat signature along the wall. Marco followed, muttering temperature readings under his breath. "Still 5 degrees higher," he said. "Same as last time. Record everything," Clara replied. Her voice echoed faintly, carrying an undertone neither of them recognized. It wasn't quite their own echo. It was slower, delayed, almost thoughtful. They began to set up new sensors, each emitting a thin beam of blue light that mapped the cave's curvature in real time. The chamber appeared larger than before, its geometry subtly different, as though the rock had shifted inward. Clara frowned. "This shouldn't happen," she said. "Stone doesn't rearrange itself." Marco ran a hand over the wall. "It's not collapse. Look, same markings, same mineral veins. But the depth readings are off by almost 2 meters. The passage expanded. They exchanged a look of disbelief. Then the microphones caught the sound again, soft, rhythmic, unmistakable, breathing. But this time, it wasn't distant. It was close. "Check your respirator," Marco said quickly. "I'm fine," Clara whispered. "That's not me." The sound persisted, slow and measured, like lungs filling and emptying somewhere just beyond the beam of her headlamp. She turned the light toward the far wall. The shimmer they had once seen was gone. No haze, no reflection. But something else glinted from within the rock. A small metallic object half buried in mineral deposits. She knelt, brushing away the dust. It was a pocket watch, its casing warped but intact. The engraving on the back read Elias Roarke, 1918. Clara's pulse thundered in her ears. "Marco, look!" He crouched beside her, shining his light across it. "It's fused to the rock," he murmured, "like it grew out of it." Before she could respond, the audio feed crackled in her earpiece. Layla's voice came through, tense. "Dr. Myles, We're picking up interference on the signal. Can you repeat last transmission? Copy that, Clara said. We found a metallic... The line hissed, then fell silent. Only static, Layla? No answer. Marco tapped his radio. We've still got local comms, but they didn't, because in that moment the static resolved itself into a whisper. Not over the speakers, inside the chamber. Don't... Come further. The voice was faint but clear, spoken in a low male tone. Clara's heart froze. Elias, she whispered before she could stop herself. The air thickened, pressing against her skin. Marco swung his flashlight wildly, illuminating nothing but stone. It's the audio feedback, he said, though his own voice trembled. But Clara knew it wasn't feedback. The voice had come from behind the wall, the same place where Roarke's carvings ended. She raised the pick from her pack and struck the surface gently. The sound echoed hollowly like tapping glass. Help me clear this section, she said. Marco hesitated. Clara, you sure about this? Elias told Anna to seal it, she replied. If we're hearing him now, it means he's still sealed inside. They worked in silence, prying loose slabs of brittle rock. Dust filled the air, coating their respirators. Each strike of the pick revealed more of the shimmering vein that pulsed faintly with reflected light. Then suddenly, a section gave way, revealing a narrow fissure behind it, a deeper tunnel descending at a sharp angle. A rush of warm air hit them, carrying that same metallic scent. Clara shone her light downward. The passage led into darkness, but at the far end something gleamed, a faint golden hue like dust suspended in still air. Marco exhaled slowly. That's not pyrite. Clara nodded, her voice a whisper. No, it's the mirror vein. She attached a fresh cable line to her harness. I'm going down. Clara, stay here and monitor. If the signal cuts again, wait 15 minutes and follow Protocol B. Before he could protest, she was already crawling through the fissure, her lamp casting narrow beams across the walls. The deeper she went, the brighter the light became, not from her lamp but from the rock itself. It glowed softly, gold and silver intertwined like veins of light running through flesh. Then she reached the floor of the new chamber. It was vast, smooth, and silent. The air shimmered faintly, heavy with suspended dust that sparkled like snow in a dream. At the center of the chamber lay something wrapped in wax cloth, perfectly preserved. She knelt, hands shaking, and peeled it back. It wasn't gold. It wasn't ore. It was metal, dull and gray, curved in strange, seamless shapes. The markings across its surface matched none of the mining symbols she knew. But when her light touched it, the metal pulsed faintly. As though responding to her presence, she reached out, and in that instant, every sound vanished. The silence was absolute. Then softly she heard it, a single human breath behind her. She turned. The light caught a figure crouched at the edge of the chamber, motionless. The brim of a miner's hat shadowed its face. For a heartbeat, Clara could not breathe. The camera on her chest flickered, recording it all, the dust, the shimmer, the shape. And then the figure moved, not toward her, but deeper, crawling further into the dark. Elias, she whispered. The figure paused, almost as if listening, before vanishing into the wall of light. Her radio crackled back to life. Marco's voice frantic. Clara, get out! The readings are spiking! But the shimmer began to collapse inward, like a lung exhaling. The light dimmed. The air grew hot. Clara grabbed the metal object, clutched it to her chest, and scrambled back toward the fissure. Rocks fell. Dust choked her vision. The rope burned against her gloves as Marco pulled her out. When they burst into daylight, the cave behind them shuddered and collapsed, sealing itself once more under a wave of stone and silence. Clara lay gasping on the sand, the dull metallic artifact heavy in her hands. Its surface flickered faintly with light, her reflection, and faintly beside it another face. Layla ran to her side, eyes wide. What happened? Clara looked toward the cave's buried mouth. The wind had returned, whispering softly across the dunes. She opened her hand, revealing the object. Its surface pulsed once, then stilled. He's still down there, she said quietly. But he's not alone. And in the silence that followed, the desert exhaled again, slow, rhythmic, patient. When dawn came, it found Clara sitting alone at the edge of camp, staring at the object she had brought up from the depths. It rested on a cloth laid carefully across her knees, dull gray in color, but alive with shifting reflections that seemed to respond to the light of the rising sun. The others still slept, their tents motionless in the cool wind, yet she could not look away from the artifact. It was unlike anything she had ever seen, neither ore nor tool, too smooth to be forged by hand, too deliberate to be natural. The surface held faint engravings that only revealed themselves when light struck from the right angle. Arcs, lines, a language made of curves. When she brushed a fingertip along one of those grooves, the metal seemed to warm under her touch. She snatched her hand back, heart pounding. It was not imagination. She had felt it. The thing responded. By the time Marco emerged from his tent, the artifact was wrapped again, hidden beneath a tarp, as though she feared it might vanish or awaken if left exposed. "You didn't sleep," he said. "I couldn't." Her voice was hoarse. "Marco, it's not gold." He knelt beside her, rubbing dust from his palms. "You said that last night before you passed out." She unwrapped the cloth just enough for him to see. In the daylight, it gleamed faintly like mercury solidified. "It's not ore," she said. "Look at the shape. It's too symmetrical. It's manufactured, but not by any method from 1918. Marco frowned, squinting at the curves. Could be some kind of prototype, maybe an old instrument part. Miners repurpose scrap metal all the time. Not like this, Clara said. Look closer. The markings. They match Roarke's carvings inside the cave. He leaned in. The pattern was indeed familiar. The same series of loops and slanted dashes she had documented on the walls, etched with precision into the artifact's surface. It wasn't random. It was language. Before they could speak further, Layla appeared, camera in hand. "The press is already speculating," she said, holding up her phone. "Somebody leaked the audio files. There's talk of government cover-ups, haunted mines, even time distortions." She managed a humorless laugh. "You've officially gone viral." Clara didn't look up. "Let them talk. We still don't know what this is." She carried the object to the work table and set up the portable X-ray imager. The scan began with a low hum, the display flickering as the beam passed over the curved surface. As the internal structure appeared on screen, the team fell silent. There was no solid core. Instead, the object contained intricate channels, hollow veins twisting and intersecting like circuitry or impossibly vascular tissue. Inside the channels were microscopic deposits of metallic dust that pulsed faintly under the scanner's light. Marco whispered, "Is it moving?" The display shimmered. The dust shifted slightly, then settled again. Clara's voice was almost reverent. "It reacts to energy, maybe even sound." They decided to test the theory. Layla connected a speaker to the scanner and played back one of the recordings from inside the cave, the rhythmic breathing followed by Roarke's faint voice. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the artifact quivered. Its surface rippled with faint concentric circles, like water disturbed by a falling stone. "Shut it off," Marco said quickly, but Clara raised a hand. "Wait." The ripples formed patterns, complex, repeating, identical to the carvings inside the cave. The same shapes reproduced through vibration. It was answering. The voice on the recording grew clearer, the phrase "still here" echoing through the tent. At that exact moment, the artifact emitted a soft hum, low and resonant, the same tone they had heard underground. It was as if the metal remembered the cave, remembered the air that had once surrounded it. Then abruptly it went still. The hum faded. The dust inside settled. The artifact cooled again, dull and lifeless. Layla shut off the speaker. The silence that followed was heavy like a held breath. Marco exhaled. "Whatever that thing is, it's dangerous. We don't know what kind of field it's emitting." Clara nodded slowly. "You're right, but it's also a message." She replayed the scan's data on her laptop, isolating the frequency at which the artifact had responded. It matched the pitch of human respiration, roughly 16 breaths per minute. The cave, the recordings, even the photograph all shared that same rhythm. "The mine isn't just a geological formation," she said softly. "It's a system, a resonant one. Everything inside it, sound, light, memory, gets stored, refracted, repeated." Layla frowned. "Like an archive made of stone." Clara smiled faintly. "Exactly." Marco shook his head. "Are you saying the cave records things? Voices, movements, records, and plays them back," she said. "That's why Roarke wrote A Vein of Memory. He wasn't being poetic. He discovered something that preserves impressions, sound, image, maybe even moments. But why would he tell Anna to seal it? Layla asked quietly. Clara hesitated. Maybe because some memories shouldn't play forever. That night, as the desert cooled into silence, Clara sat alone again beside the tarp-covered artifact. The wind sighed across the sand, mimicking that slow, familiar breathing. She played the recording one last time, listening not to the words but to the rhythm beneath them. Inhale, exhale, a heartbeat carved into stone. When the file ended, she heard something new, so soft she thought she imagined it. A second voice layered beneath Roarke's fainter female. "He's not gone." Clara froze. She replayed it, boosting the volume. The words repeated, unmistakable now. "He's not gone." She looked toward the cave's distant outline, a shadow barely visible under the stars. The tarp over the artifact fluttered in the wind. Beneath it something faintly glowed, light pulsing in rhythm with the sound of her breath. For the first time, Clara felt the line between discovery and haunting blur. This wasn't about finding what Elias Roarke had left behind. It was about awakening what he had become part of, and whatever that was, it had begun to breathe again. The days that followed blurred into one long vigil beneath the Nevada sun. The desert held its breath around them, as though the world itself were waiting for something to happen. Clara hardly slept. Every night she replayed the same loop of sounds. Elias Roarke's breath, the faint female whisper beneath it, and the metallic hum of the artifact answering from its tarp-covered cradle. Each time she heard something new. Sometimes it was the echo of footsteps, sometimes a muffled word, sometimes, terrifyingly, her own voice whispering back. She no longer doubted that the cave and the object were connected, but she still didn't know how. And yet, deep in her chest, she felt certain there was something they hadn't uncovered. Something Roarke had left behind, buried, coded, or hidden in plain sight. The answer came from an unexpected place, the miner's original survey map. It had been framed inside the Institute for weeks, hanging beside the restored photograph. Layla, sorting through a stack of documents back in Reno, noticed a strange inconsistency. Roarke's hand-drawn grid didn't match the known topography of the Tonopah region. Some distances were doubled, others halved. When she compared the map's coordinates with early geological survey charts, the lines simply didn't align. At first, she thought it was a mistake. But late that night, while scanning the parchment at high resolution, she saw something faint beneath the ink, shadows of lines, barely visible, running perpendicular to the ones on the surface. A second drawing. When Clara received Layla's message with the image attached, her exhaustion dissolved into focus. The hidden lines were not random. They formed a pattern, a smaller mirror-like replica of the main tunnels rotated 180 degrees. She printed the image, laid it beside Roarke's ledger, and felt the thrill of revelation crawl up her spine. "The map beneath the map," she whispered. Layla, over the radio link, asked, "You think he drew a second layer intentionally?" "Yes, something he didn't want seen by whoever might have read his first map. A false surface hiding the real network." Clara paused. "He called it the mirror vein. This must be it." Within hours, they packed the camp and returned to the cave. The site was still sealed by the last collapse, but Clara felt strangely certain she would find a way back in. Marco brought new equipment, magnetic sensors, resonance drills, and a portable tomography unit. As they scanned the area, he frowned at the readings. "There's a hollow cavity behind the main collapse," he said. "Big, roughly 20 meters wide. You were right, there's another chamber deeper in. How far?" "Too far for the hand tools. But if we follow this line," he traced a finger along the printout of the tomography, "there's a secondary shaft that runs parallel to the main one. It was never on any mining record. If Roarke dug that himself, he did it in secret." The next day they found the entrance, a narrow split in the hillside, almost invisible beneath a curtain of brush. The air that escaped from it was dry but carried that unmistakable metallic tang, older than dust. "This is it," Clara said quietly. They descended again, one careful step after another. The passage sloped downward, curving like the spine of some ancient creature. The walls gleamed faintly, veins of quartz twisting around darker seams that seemed to swallow the light. The further they went, the more Clara felt that familiar hum building through her boots. Layla's voice crackled through the comms. "We've got good visuals. Proceed slowly." At 50 meters, the tunnel opened into a new chamber. Clara froze at the threshold. Unlike the others, this one wasn't rough or natural, it had been shaped. The walls were smooth, curving into perfect arcs. At the center stood a platform of stone, and on it, half buried in silt, was a sheet of metal so thin it shimmered like glass. Clara brushed the dirt away. Underneath, etched faintly but deliberately, was the same circular pattern she had seen glowing inside the artifact. "It's a map," she murmured. Marco crouched beside her. "Of what?" She traced the circles with her gloved finger. "Not of the tunnels." Of sound. The realization hit her as she spoke. The etched lines weren't geographical. They were waveforms. Roarke had drawn a sound map. Each concentric circle represented a frequency, a rhythm, an echo recorded within the stone. And at the center of it all, inscribed faintly but unmistakably, was a single phrase written in English. "The Earth remembers." "Clara," Marco said quietly. "There's something else here." He pointed toward the far wall. Embedded halfway into the rock was a second object, identical in shape to the artifact she had found earlier but larger, its surface fractured as though it had once been struck. From the crack, faint gold light leaked into the chamber, pulsing gently, matching the rhythm of their own breathing. Clara felt dizzy. The air hummed against her skin. "What if the artifact isn't singular?" she said. "What if it's part of something larger, an array, a network designed to resonate?" Marco didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the glowing fissure. "If that thing ruptures, we could be standing inside a natural amplifier." She stepped closer, unable to stop herself. The glow brightened, illuminating more of the carvings around it. There were words there too, though many had eroded. Only fragments remained. Voice, breath, return. Suddenly the radios hissed to life. Layla's voice came through, distorted by static. "Clara, we're losing your signal. You're getting..." The line went dead. Then came another voice, faint but distinct. "A man's. Anna." The single word echoed through the chamber, carried not by the radio but by the stone itself. Marco stumbled back, flashlight shaking. "That came from the wall," he said. Clara's knees weakened. "He's replaying himself," she whispered. Elias recorded his voice in the rock, but even as she said it, something shifted in the light. The fractured metal pulsed brighter, and within its glow she saw movement, shadows coalescing into the faint shape of a man crawling forward, as if emerging from the wall itself. Marco cursed under his breath. "We need to leave, now!" But Clara couldn't move. The shadow paused, head bowed, hand reaching out toward the smaller artifact in her pack. When his fingers, if they were fingers, touched the light, the two objects resonated in unison. The chamber filled with the same deep hum they had recorded before, only stronger now, layered with whispers and the sound of shifting air. The ground trembled. Dust cascaded from the ceiling. Marco grabbed Clara's arm, pulling her back toward the tunnel. As they fled upward, the hum grew sharper, almost melodic, a song of breath, of metal, of memory collapsing into itself. When they finally burst into the open desert, the vibration still followed them, echoing through the ground beneath their feet. Layla ran toward them. "What happened?" Clara collapsed to her knees, clutching the artifact. "We found his map," she said, her voice trembling. "But it wasn't leading to gold." Layla stared at her. "Then what was it leading to?" Clara looked back toward the black mouth of the cave. The sound had stopped now. The earth was silent again. "To himself," she said softly. "He built a map that leads back to his own echo." And though the desert was still, Clara thought she could feel the faint vibration lingering beneath the sand. A heartbeat, buried but alive, waiting for the next voice to speak its name. The following morning dawned blood orange over the Nevada horizon, the desert air brittle and cold, as if the earth itself had exhaled through the night and forgotten to breathe back in. Clara Myles stood beside the ruined mouth of the Roarke claim, her boots sunk in sand, eyes fixed on the faint tremor running beneath her feet. The others were still asleep, but she had been awake since before dawn, listening. The ground hummed in low intervals, almost like a slow pulse, steady, patient, alive. Every time she thought it had stopped, it began again. She didn't tell Marco or Layla that she could hear words in the vibration when she pressed her ear to the earth. Faint syllables, indecipherable, rising and falling like the breath of something sleeping below. Instead, she told them what she had already decided. They had to go back one last time. "I'm done with this," Marco said flatly when she gathered them at the camp table. His eyes were hollow from lack of sleep. "Whatever's down there isn't geology. It's not physics either. It's memory," Clara interrupted. "It's recording." Roarke knew that. He tried to seal it, but it didn't stop. She spread the images from Layla's scans across the table, the sound map etched into metal, the second artifact pulsing inside the chamber, the overlapping circles carved into the stone. These aren't random markings. They're coordinates. The cave isn't collapsing, it's expanding. It's rebuilding the moment it captured in 1918. Layla's voice was quiet. "Rebuilding?" Clara nodded. "A memory loop. It's trying to finish what started when Roarke crawled in. Every sound, every light source, every breath, it's repeating itself. But the cycle's unstable. If we don't document it now, it might collapse entirely. And when it does, it'll take everything inside. His voice, his recordings, maybe even the structure itself." Marco stared at her for a long moment, then exhaled sharply. "You're going back in no matter what we say, aren't you?" "Yes," she said simply. He rubbed his face, muttering something in Spanish that sounded halfway between prayer and curse. "Then I'm coming with you." Layla hesitated. "And me?" Clara looked up. "Stay topside. Monitor our signal. If anything goes wrong—" "I know," Layla said softly. "Seal it." They didn't say more. By mid-morning, the two of them, Clara and Marco, descended once more into the dark, carrying only what was necessary: light rigs, audio sensors, and the smaller artifact, which Clara kept strapped against her chest. The cave had changed again. The tunnel walls shimmered faintly as though breathing. Dust floated in patterns that seemed to bend around invisible currents of air. At the first junction, Marco paused, holding up the sensor. "Magnetic readings are off the charts. The whole structure's oscillating." Clara felt it too, a subtle vibration like standing too close to a massive speaker. Each breath she took seemed to echo a fraction of a second later, coming back from the stone. They pressed on. The deeper they went, the warmer the air grew. The shimmer that had once seemed like reflection now thickened into a veil, light without source, pulsing faintly with their movements. At last, the tunnel opened into the large chamber again, the one with the fractured artifact embedded in the wall. Except now the fissure had widened. The golden glow spilled across the floor like liquid sunlight, illuminating patterns that had been invisible before. Countless handprints pressed into the stone, small and large, overlapping, as though generations had touched the same wall searching for a way out. Clara felt her throat tighten. He wasn't the only one who came down here. Marco swallowed hard. "How many?" She crouched, tracing one of the handprints. "Enough to fill a memory." The hum deepened, resonant now, vibrating through their bones. Dust fell from the ceiling in slow, shimmering arcs. The air trembled, alive with sound too low to be heard but too powerful not to feel. Then from within the glow a shape began to emerge, a silhouette, crawling forward just as Roarke had in the photograph. A miner's form, body half-formed from light and dust, repeating the motion over and over like a looped image. Marco staggered back. "It's him." "It's Roarke." Clara shook her head. "No, it's the recording of him." The cave's memory, but as she spoke, the figure paused. Its head turned slightly toward her voice. For a moment, the shimmer of light aligned with its face, and she saw features, tired eyes, dust-caked skin, the unmistakable fear of a man realizing he was not alone. "Elias Roarke," she whispered. The figure's lips moved, soundless at first, then forming words through the hum. "Seal it." The ground buckled beneath them. Marco shouted, "It's destabilizing!" and grabbed Clara's arm, pulling her back toward the tunnel. But she resisted, staring at the glowing fissure. Inside it, the fractured artifact pulsed erratically, gold light flickering like a heartbeat in distress. The smaller artifact on her chest began to vibrate in response, emitting the same tone. "Clara!" Marco roared. "I have to synchronize it." She shouted back. "If I don't, it'll collapse completely." Ignoring his protests, she unstrapped the smaller piece and placed it gently against the larger one in the wall. The moment the two touched, the hum stopped. Silence. Then a burst of light so bright it erased the chamber. Marco shielded his eyes. Clara stood motionless, bathed in gold, her hair lifting slightly as if caught in a wind that didn't exist. She could see everything now. Roarke crawling into the cave, Anna's face drawn from memory, the breath of the desert above, time folding in on itself like a closing hand. She understood suddenly what he had meant. The earth wasn't remembering events. It was remembering people. Their movements, their voices, their fears, all trapped in mineral resonance, replaying endlessly until someone touched the key that unlocked it. And she had just done that. The ground roared. A sound like thunder cracked through the rock. Marco lunged forward, grabbed Clara's shoulder and yanked her back as the fissure imploded, sealing itself with a shockwave of dust and light. They stumbled into the tunnel, half blind, crawling as stones rained down around them. The rope burned through Marco's gloves as he dragged them upward, coughing, choking, hearts pounding. When they burst out into daylight, Layla was already screaming their names. The ground convulsed once, then went still. Behind them, the mouth of the Roarke claim collapsed inward completely, burying everything, the chamber, the artifacts, the echoes, under tons of stone. The desert was silent again. Clara lay sprawled on the sand, coughing, lungs raw. In her hands she still clutched the smaller artifact, but it was cracked now, the light gone. Only dust remained inside the fracture, shimmering faintly in the sun. Layla knelt beside her. "You're alive," she breathed. Marco looked back toward the mountain. "It's over," he said. Clara didn't answer. She could still feel the vibration under her fingertips. Faint but steady, pulsing in time with her heartbeat. That night, as they packed their equipment for the final time, she sat alone, staring at the horizon where the cave once stood. The stars above shimmered faintly, gold and silver and blue, scattered like ore dust across the sky. When she closed her eyes, she could hear him again. Rourke's voice, faint but certain, carried on the desert wind. The earth remembers. And for the first time, she wasn't sure whether it was an echo or an answer. For days after the collapse, the Nevada Historical Institute was buried in noise. Reporters, government officials, scientists, even the military, all demanding answers to what Clara's team had found beneath the Roarke claim. Clara said little. She sat in her office, surrounded by crates of dirt-caked equipment, staring at the cracked artifact that now lay silent on her desk. The hum that had once filled her bones was gone. All that remained was an empty hush that somehow felt heavier than sound. When the initial chaos died down, the Institute's director ordered an official review of the recorded material, all footage, all sensor data, all body cam feeds. "We need to establish a timeline," he said, "and something we can show the press that doesn't make us sound like lunatics." Clara, still pale from exhaustion, volunteered to lead the review herself. She told no one that her reasons were personal. She wasn't looking for evidence of a phenomenon anymore. She was looking for proof that what she had seen, who she had seen, had truly been there. In a darkened conference room, the projector hummed softly as the first video began to play. The crawl into the tunnel, the first chamber, the glow, the carved symbols. The familiar scenes unfolded in clinical silence. But when the footage reached the point of the collapse, everyone fell still. On screen, Clara appeared frozen before the fissure, gold light wrapping around her. Marco could be heard shouting her name. Then came the sound, the deep, low hum that had filled the entire cave. The waveform on the side monitor spiked and flattened, the frequencies beyond human range. "Pause there," Clara said. The technician obeyed. The frame froze on the golden burst, a flood of light that seemed almost liquid, washing across the camera lens. Clara leaned forward. "Enhance the still," she murmured. The technician frowned but complied, isolating the brightest portion of the image and adjusting the contrast. Slowly through the haze of dust and motion blur, a shape began to emerge. The outline of a man crouched low, one arm extended toward Clara. His hand was inches from hers. "Is that?" Layla whispered. Clara's throat tightened. "Yes, Elias Roarke." No one spoke for a long time. The figure's features were faint but unmistakable. The miner's hat, the torn sleeve, the angle of his face as he reached toward her. Behind him, the walls of the cave seemed to ripple, frozen mid-collapse like liquid stone. The technician zoomed in further. The pixels stretched, blurred, and then suddenly, within the shimmer of light beside Rourke's figure, another image surfaced. It was Clara herself, not the Clara in the footage, but a reflection, faint, reversed, positioned just behind the miner's shoulder. Her eyes wide, mouth half open, frozen as if caught in the act of recognition. "Wait," Layla said. "That's impossible." "That's not a mirror angle," Marco swore under his breath. "That's her reflection in his light." The room was silent. The projector's beam flickered, casting shifting gold across the walls. Clara's heart pounded, but she couldn't look away. The light from Roarke's lamp, if it was his lamp, had reflected her image within his frame across more than a century. The mine hadn't just recorded sound, it had recorded sight. And somehow it had folded both their moments together, 1918 and 2025, into a single exposure of time. She leaned back, whispering almost to herself, "He saw me." The technician cleared his throat, uneasy. "There's more footage," he said. They continued. The next file was the body cam from Marco, its lens cracked during the collapse. For several minutes, the screen showed nothing but dust and darkness. Then, as the noise settled, a faint glow appeared, the fractured artifact still embedded in the wall, pulsing once, twice, then going dark. But in the seconds before total blackout, a movement flickered at the edge of the frame, the silhouette of a person crawling deeper into the tunnel past the point of collapse. The shape moved slowly, deliberately, as if seeking something beyond reach. "That's not me," Marco said quietly. "I was pulling Clara out at that point." Layla swallowed hard. "Then who was it?" Clara leaned forward, her hands trembling. The frame froze on the crawling figure. The body proportions were wrong for any of them, too broad, too solid. Yet when the technician enhanced the contrast, the outline of the clothing became clear. A miner's shirt. Canvas trousers, a hat tilted low, Roarke again. Only this time, his movements were not frantic, not trapped. He was crawling forward, not to escape but to continue. Clara stared, her mind circling the impossible. If he had vanished in 1918, if his body had never been found, could it be that he hadn't died at all but simply become part of the memory loop he'd uncovered? A man folded into the cave's resonance, existing in that fraction of time that replayed endlessly, between breath and silence. "Play the last frame," she said. The technician hesitated. "Dr. Myles, there's something unusual at the end. I should warn you." "Play it." The final seconds of footage rolled. The image was distorted, the audio a wash of static. But as the camera turned, maybe by accident, maybe by design, it captured the passage behind them, illuminated by the last flicker of light. And there, for less than half a second, the screen showed something that made everyone in the room gasp. Another miner, but this one wasn't Roarke. The figure was cleaner, the clothes less tattered, the lamp modern. And around the neck, glinting faintly in the gold light, was the same recorder Clara wore during the expedition. It was her, or rather, it was a version of her, crawling forward into the same darkness Roarke had entered, mirroring his movement exactly, like the reflection in the photograph that had begun the whole story. Then the footage ended. The room remained still for a long time, no one daring to speak. The only sound was the soft mechanical whir of the projector as it reached the end of the tape. Layla was the first to break the silence. "You think the cave recorded you too?" Clara didn't answer. She stood slowly, her eyes on the flickering light of the projector beam. "I think," she said softly, "it's still recording." Marco rose beside her. "You're not going back." She turned to face him. "I don't need to. It's already here," he frowned. "What do you mean?" Clara walked to the table, where the cracked artifact lay beneath its glass casing. She pressed her palm gently against its cool surface. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, faintly beneath her hand, the metal warmed, just slightly enough for her to feel the pulse return. Layla stepped back. "It's still active?" Clara looked at the surface. It reflected her face dimly, the crack splitting her reflection into fragments. And there, in the largest shard, she thought she saw someone else beside her, a man's outline, faint, dusty, waiting. "No," she whispered. "It's awake." That night, long after everyone had gone home, Clara stayed alone in the Institute's viewing room. The final frame of the footage, her mirrored self crawling into darkness, remained frozen on the screen. She dimmed the lights, pressed play one last time, and listened. Through the hiss of static came a sound she knew by heart. Not words, not breath, but the faint metallic echo of someone striking rock with a pickaxe. 3 times. Tap, 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 then silence. But in that silence, if she held her breath long enough, she could almost hear it, the desert itself breathing, carrying the memory of gold and dust, and the echo of two miners crawling endlessly through time, each chasing the other into the same narrow vein of earth where nothing ever truly ends. The institute emptied slowly over the following weeks, but Clara never truly left. Her colleagues returned to their routines, reports were filed. The noise around the Roarke discovery faded into rumor and speculation. The government sealed the site permanently, citing structural instability. By summer, the cave's coordinates were erased from all digital maps, its location buried behind access protocols no civilian could breach. The world, it seemed, wanted the story to end, but for Clara Myles it hadn't. Every night she found herself drawn back to the lab where the fractured artifact lay sealed behind reinforced glass. No matter how many times she told herself it was just residual energy, she could feel it, a pulse so faint it seemed synced to her own. And every time she stood before it, the reflection in the glass seemed to change. At first it was only her own weary face, then faintly, the glint of another figure behind her shoulder, a miner's hat, the brim tilted low. By the fifth night, the Institute's motion sensors began tripping on their own. Security reported seeing flickers of light in the archival wing, as though someone were walking the halls with an old oil lamp. Each time they checked, the corridors were empty. Layla stopped coming after that. She said she needed space, distance. Marco too. He left a final note on Clara's desk. Some memories were never meant to be translated. He didn't sign his name, so when Clara decided to return to Tonopah alone, there was no one left to argue. The desert greeted her the same way it always had, silent, endless, indifferent. She parked her truck near the ridge where the Roarke claim had once been and stood for a long while watching the horizon shimmer in the heat. There was no visible entrance anymore. The cave had sealed itself after the collapse, but she could still feel it beneath her feet, humming faintly like a buried current. From the back of the truck, she lifted the artifact's case, now lightless, cold, and carried it to the spot where the sand dipped slightly, a depression too symmetrical to be natural. She knelt, brushed away the top layer of dust and waited. At first, nothing. Then the ground shifted slightly beneath her hands, releasing a soft exhalation of warm air, a breath from the earth. Clara smiled faintly. "Hello, Elias." She set the artifact down and began recording. Her voice was calm, methodical, though her pulse raced beneath it. "This is Dr. Clara Myles recording Field Note 57. I am standing above the Roarke claim. Closed April 1918, collapsed 2025. Current objective, to verify whether subsonic resonance persists through the sealed strata." She paused, listening. The wind moved across the desert, whispering through dry grass. Then faintly a response. 3 soft knocks beneath the soil. Tap, tap, tap. The same rhythm Roarke had left behind. Clara dug with her hands, the sand giving way easily, as if it wanted to be moved. After several minutes, her fingers brushed rock. Smooth, cool, familiar. The hum deepened. "Show me," she whispered. As if obeying, a narrow crack formed in the ground, spilling thin threads of golden dust that shimmered in the sunlight. The air turned warm, heavy, metallic. She felt her breath catch, not from fear, but from awe. The scent was unmistakable. Iron, pyrite, the same mineral tang that had haunted her dreams. Then came the sound, not breathing this time, but whispering. Hundreds of voices layered softly, like wind through reeds. Some she recognized, Rourke's, Anna Doyle's from her letters, maybe even Marco's. Others she did not. All of them repeating the same cadence, words interwoven with breath. The earth remembers. Clara lowered herself closer to the crack, the sound enveloping her. It was beautiful and terrible at once, not mournful, not pleading, but alive. Each whisper carried the tone of someone halfway between memory and rebirth. She placed her palm against the sand. The vibrations rippled through her bones, aligning with her heartbeat until she could no longer tell which rhythm was hers. The artifact, still in its case, began to tremble. Its fractured core emitted a faint pulse of light. Not gold this time, but white, steady, quiet. "I understand," she said softly. The ground beneath her shifted again, widening. The breath of the earth deepened, almost like a sigh. For a fleeting instant, she saw light inside the fissure. A tunnel glowing from within. Exactly as it had in her dreams, the Breathless Passage. Roarke had written the words 100 times in his ledger, describing a place where air grew thin, where sound moved like light. And now at last she understood. It wasn't a physical corridor at all. It was a boundary, a threshold between memory and the world above, between what the earth keeps and what it lets go. Clara reached into her bag, pulled out her recorder and pressed on. "Elias," she whispered. "I'm ready to listen." The hum responded instantly, rising in pitch until it became almost melodic. The sand vibrated beneath her knees, swirling in perfect concentric patterns. The light from the fissure grew brighter, and within it shadows began to move, slow, deliberate, like people waking after a long sleep. She recognized one of them first by the curve of his shoulders. Roarke, his outline solidified, crawling upward, the same motion frozen in that 1918 photograph. But there were others behind him now, miners perhaps, or echoes of them. Their faces blurred, but their movements human, purposeful. Clara did not move away. "I see you," she said. The leading figure paused. Slowly he raised his head. His eyes, or where they might have been, caught the white light and reflected it back in a shimmer of gold. Then he spoke, his voice layered with others, the sound traveling through air and stone alike. "You found it," he said. "You opened what should not breathe." Clara's voice trembled. "What is it?" "The place between," came the reply. "Where every sound that ever was waits to be heard again." She swallowed hard. "Can I stop it?" The light pulsed faster. "Would you silence memory itself?" Behind him, the other figures moved in unison, merging with the glow until their edges dissolved into the dust. The fissure widened further, the breath of the passage spilling across the desert, carrying with it a wind that sounded almost like voices laughing, crying, remembering. Clara stood, the wind whipping her hair, her recorder still running. "Then let me be part of it," the voice answered gently. "Once you enter, you do not return as you were." "I know," she stepped closer. The artifact flared with light, its cracked ceiling whole again for the first time since the collapse. The air shimmered around her, heat-bending reality. For a heartbeat she felt herself split, one part still standing in the desert, the other already within that corridor of light, where time folded in on itself. Her final words were barely a whisper, swallowed by the wind. "The earth remembers. So will I." Then she stepped forward. The light engulfed her, soft as breath. The fissure closed without a sound. The wind stilled. By the time the sun rose higher, there was no trace of her, only a faint shimmer of dust in the air, sparkling like mica, and the hum of the desert returning to silence. That afternoon, a park ranger driving the ridge road reported hearing faint tapping sounds beneath his tires as he passed the old site. 3 slow, even knocks. Tap, 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 and somewhere deep below, where gold veins shimmered like memory, the echo of Clara's voice joined the rest, a new breath in the endless passage of sound. The footage was never supposed to exist, at least, not according to the Institute's official report. The servers were wiped after Clara Myles' disappearance, the drives cataloging her expedition sealed in federal storage, their data classified under Geological Hazard Protocol. The world moved on. The story became myth, a cautionary tale traded among students of history and geoscience, always ending the same way. She went looking for the Earth's memory and never came back. But myths, like echoes, have a way of persisting. 7 months later, a graduate archivist named Naomi Wells was cataloging legacy footage from the Institute's digital restoration wing when she stumbled on an unlabeled file buried inside an auxiliary drive. The metadata timestamp read 1918-2025, as if 2 years had been entered in the same field. Curious, she opened it. The video began with static, harsh, white, almost painful. Then, gradually, the image resolved into motion. Clara standing in the desert, the morning she vanished. She wasn't speaking into her recorder this time. She was looking directly at the camera, wind tugging her hair across her face. Her expression was neither afraid nor triumphant. It was listening. Behind her, faintly, the sand shifted in rhythmic pulses and like breathing. Naomi frowned, glancing at the file's data stream. The signal embedded within it pulsed at an irregular frequency, similar to a heartbeat. When she increased the gain, faint audio emerged, not wind but a chorus of overlapping whispers. "The earth remembers. The earth remembers." Then Clara's lips moved, barely audible. "And so will I," the footage flickered. The image distorted, bending inward as though time itself were folding over the frame. For a heartbeat, the screen filled with light. Not white, but gold, dense and living. When the light cleared, Clara was gone. In her place stood the mouth of the Roarke claim, whole again, uncollapsed. And crawling toward it, frozen mid-motion, was Elias Roarke. Naomi paused the video. Her skin prickled. She zoomed in on the miner's face, though the image degraded almost immediately. The timestamp flickered again. 1918-04, 12-2025, 04-12. The same day, a century apart. "Impossible," she whispered. She adjusted the playback rate. As the frame advanced, a shadow appeared in the cave behind Roarke. Faint, modern, human. A reflection of someone holding a digital camera. For a moment, Naomi thought it was herself, then realized what she was seeing. Clara reflected again, just as she'd appeared in the enhanced 1918 photograph. It wasn't a recording. It was a recurrence. The system lagged under the strain of rendering both timelines at once. The sound warped, rising into a hum so low it seemed to shake the floor. Naomi tried to stop the playback, but the controls froze. The image expanded across her monitor, the edges bleeding into static, light leaking from the screen as though the gold dust had found its way into the air around her. Then, amid the distortion, the frame stilled. The camera, unmoving, showed the interior of the cave, smooth stone walls shimmering with faint veins of light. And in the center, lying on the ground, was the metallic artifact, whole again, its surface flawless. The cracks were gone. Naomi leaned closer. On the artifact's surface, faint reflections began to appear, not just of the cave, but of faces. Dozens of them, layered like translucent glass. Elias Roarke, Anna Doyle, Clara Myles, and behind them, faint outlines of others, miners, soldiers, travelers, archivists, people who had walked the same earth, their breaths captured and replayed through time. And among them, one face turned sharply as if aware of being watched. Clara's. Her eyes met the camera, steady and calm. For a moment, Naomi thought she saw her lips move. Still watching. The screen went black. The file auto-deleted. Naomi sat frozen in the darkened lab, heart pounding. The air felt heavy, like the seconds before a storm breaks. She glanced toward the glass case that held the fractured remains of the original artifact, the one found after the collapse, supposedly inert. For months it had lain there without incident, dull gray under the fluorescence, but now as she watched, its surface shimmered faintly, not with gold but with colorless light. Like breath on metal, she rose slowly, approaching it. The closer she came, the warmer the air grew, humming faintly in time with her heartbeat. For a moment she thought she saw her reflection multiply, one, then two, then three versions of herself overlapping, each a fraction out of sync. Naomi reached out, her hand trembling. "Clara?" she whispered. The hum deepened, a note so low it vibrated through her chest. Then, from somewhere beyond the glass, faint and rhythmic, came three soft taps. Tap, tap, tap. The lights flickered once, twice. When they steadied again, the reflection in the glass was no longer hers. It was a miner, bent forward, dust streaking his face, eyes shadowed under the brim of his hat. Behind him, faintly illuminated, stood a woman. Hair loose, expression serene, hand resting on his shoulder. The hum subsided. The glass cooled. Naomi stepped back, breath shallow, unsure whether she had imagined it. The reflection faded to nothing but her own pale face staring back. Later that night, the security cameras caught her leaving the building alone, carrying nothing but a field recorder and a folded map of Tonopah. She drove west and was never seen again. Weeks later, hikers reported a faint glimmer of light in the desert where the Roarke claim had once been. When rescue teams searched the area, they found only a single object half buried in the sand, the metallic artifact, whole once more, humming softly in the wind. And on its surface, barely visible, a new reflection had appeared. A young woman with dark hair, eyes wide in wonder, leaning close to listen. For a moment, if you were standing there, if you were very quiet, you might have heard it too. The breath of the desert, the whisper of gold, and a single, unending voice murmuring beneath it all. The earth remembers,